We're also joined from San Francisco by Antonia Juhasz, the author of The Tyranny of Oil, the world's most powerful industry, and what we must do to stop it. She's director of the Chevron program at Global Exchange. She's been looking at the millions of dollars BP spends on lobbying. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Antonia Juhasz. You write in The Observer that the explosion of BP Transocean's Deepwater Horizon drilling rig is neither surprising nor unexpected. Why?
Well, for a lot of the reasons that Tyson has cited, this company in particular has an egregious record of cost-cutting. The finding that Tyson had referenced to the 2005 Texas City explosion, the U.S. Chemical Safety Board found basically a long history of egregious mismanagement, egregious cost-cutting, and an egregious rejection to the concept of security. BP, while it was experiencing its highest profits in its own history in '99 and 2005, cut spending 25% across all of its U.S. refineries. It operates 5. And the Chemical Safety Board found this cost-cutting and a lack of attention to security as the cause of that tragic explosion in 2005. That explosion was, at its time, the largest workplace accident in the United States in 15 years. Now, that was 15 workers died. Now we have 11 workers presumed dead, but certainly the magnitude of this explosion is certainly going to top that 2005 explosion, and it's the same company. But I think beyond the lack of surprise that, unfortunately, that the next great major U.S. oil industry incident involved BP, was the lack of surprise, unfortunately, that it took place in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico and involved offshore drilling, and that it involved this industry. Essentially, we have the largest, wealthiest industry in the world. In 2009, for the first time, 7 of the 10 largest corporations on the planet were oil companies. They have used their wealth, including BP, to lobby aggressively, spend on campaigns aggressively, push the boundaries of what's technologically feasible to get oil, and to use their money to gain access to places I think they shouldn't even be, and to reduce the regulatory oversight over those operations. So we have them simultaneously working in places they shouldn't be working, under less regulatory oversight than should be in place. And that has everything to do with the money available to this industry, which isn't available to others. Antonia
Juhasz, talk about the lobbying money that is being spent by BP in Washington.
BP spent $16.5 million lobbying last year. That made it among the top 20 lobbyists in the United States. That was $6.5 million more than it spent in 2008, which was its previous record. It is following the trend of the oil industry as a whole, which has significantly increased its lobbying, essentially since the Obama administration came in, or since the Democrats took over the House and the Senate. Under the Bush administration, you essentially had an oil government, an industry that was filled with oil industry executives, lawyers, lobbyists, people on their way in and out of the administration to the oil industry. And essentially, the industry was able to legislate and not lobby, which they did for 8 years under Bush. When the Democrats and Obama then took over, the industry was forced to revert to the more standard method of lobbying to get what it wants. And while this administration is most certainly not an oil administration, it is far from immune to the just massive, massive dollars that are being poured in to lobbying by this industry. And I think we evidenced that most directly when Obama continued the process that Bush began of opening up our offshore waters to more drilling. Thank goodness Obama has pulled back on that and said we're going to wait and see to the cause of this accident. But this industry spends really enormous, unprecedented amounts of money on lobbying but that now may yet pale. When we look at how much, for example, BP spent on campaigns in 2008, a mere $500,000 sounds like nothing compared to its lobbying. Well, now with Citizens United, those relatively small campaign investments relative to lobbying investments now, of course, can equal the lobbying investments. And so this is a critical moment as Citizens United takes effect. And while we think we've seen the power of this industry to influence public policy, we have no idea what it's going to be like now that they can open the floodgates. I mean, literally, this is an industry that has too much cash. It does not know what to do with its cash on hand. That's one of the reasons why it spends $1 million a day, drilling for oil in places where, only 2 out of 10 of the holes they drill even yield oil. They have enough wealth to push and get as much oil as they can. Once that money starts going into campaigns, we're really at a critical juncture where we have to rein in the industry immediately before that flood of cash really hits our political spectrum.
Antonia Juhasz, I asked you about specifically the money that BP spends on lobbying, but overall, how much it is spending on its PR campaign, the whole rebranding of BP from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum, its whole, what many call greenwashing.
Yes, most certainly greenwashing. That switch to Beyond Petroleum, I believe, took place in 2005, and it truly is simply a PR greenwash. At very best, using very generous estimates on my part, I found that BP spent, at best, 4% of its total capital and exploratory budget on anything remotely resembling green alternative energy. Now, 4% is real money when you look at BP's budget, but it hardly qualifies the company to be beyond petroleum when everything else that it's doing is in the petroleum sector and the most aggressive modes of production, whether it's the tar sands, offshore, really breaking the boundaries of the damages that can be caused from oil production. And that 4%, by the way, was a high point. BP has since cut its alternative energy investment significantly. It even closed its alternative energy headquarters in London. It's really pulling itself back in, like the rest of the oil industry is, to move more aggressively into oil, the place where they can ultimately make the most money. And again, oil, of course, reached a high of $150 a barrel, fell significantly down, but it's on its way back up. So the company I pay the closest attention to, for example, Chevron, like most of the industry, its profits fell significantly last year as the price of a barrel of oil fell. Well, this first quarter of 2010, Chevron doubled its profits from the first quarter of 2009. I imagine BP is in the same circumstance. They're on their way back up, but they're doing that by really focusing in on oil, not on alternative energy. So it is pure greenwashing to think of this company as anything other than an oil company and to think of it as anything other than a dirty oil company.
2007 customer survey found that BP by far had the most environmentally friendly image of any major oil company. That year, the Beyond Petroleum campaign also won the Gold Award from the American Marketing Association. Antonia Juhasz.
They do a great job of marketing. They spend a lot of money on marketing. And to be fair, that public perception is right. Of all the oil companies, BP spends the most on alternative energy, or at least has over the past couple years. That 4%, sadly, was the best. Most of the other companies spent 3%, 2%, 0% in the case of Exxon until very recently. So, at 4%, this was the best company. That 4% is pennies. It's pure greenwashing. The problem is that the public is increasingly perceiving this greenwashing as a real marker, a hallmark on where they think the industry is going. And it's logical to think that if oil is running out,